marriage often begun without thought and ended without sorrow, entered my life when Becky Garland, a friend, pregnant and unwed, asked me to help her obtain an abortion, or barring that possibility, marry her. She wanted her newborn to have a surname unlike her own. Becky's unnerving request occurred on the campus of the University of Colorado at Boulder, Friday, December 9th, 1955. We had just left the old main theater, having heard a perfectly execrable lecture on Russian literature by Tatiana Ostranova-Nensberg, who had invited guests and her 9 students, 2 of whom included Becky, a sophomore, and me, a senior, to her home at 703 Walnut, where she may have hoped to anesthetize our pain with vodka. The paragraph I read about the young woman is a true story. It began when I was actually a freshman in the spring of '54 at the university. I knew the young woman as a friend among friends, and she came to me, and one day she asked me if I would help her get an abortion. She said she was pregnant. I said to her perhaps she ought to speak to her boyfriends, and she said she had, and he had refused to help. I had a car. I was one of the few freshmen who did. She said, because you have a car, you can go visit doctor's offices and ask them if they'll help me. Well, I couldn't very well say no to a friend, so there were 2 OB men in Boulder at the time, 1954, and both of them turned me down. They said they couldn't help me. However, the second one offered me a name with an address and a number in Los Angeles. He said, pass this along to the young woman whom I'm sure he assumed was my girlfriend. And I did. She did go to California, and in fact she had an abortion. But I was so struck by that story, which has remained with me for years, that I asked myself, what would have happened if she did not have the abortion? Who would have met her in California when she went out there and driven her to where she had to go? And I thought, I'll put my mother into this story, who is a very caring woman, and I'll have Becky arrive in California, and my mother will take her to the rendezvous. And for various reasons, they decide not to have the abortion. And then I bring the story back to Boulder. 1954 was a time of political tensions, which one could very much sense and feel in the air.
As it was quoted, was the effect that you thought perhaps not only the man who gave me this information about communists, but also Senator McCarthy might be guilty of a crime. Now,
I repeat that statement, sir. I do not believe you can receive information that is obtained by criminal means and hold it in your possession without the probability of you two being guilty of crime.
Well, I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that I'm not afraid of anything about you, anything you got to say, at any time, any place, anywhere. But here's something that neither Mr. Clifford nor Secretary Stevens nor I have much to do with. The charge that the CIA is infiltrated, infested with communists. The charge that the Department of Defense is full of communists. The charge that the Department of Justice, that the Attorney General of the Department of Justice, there's something phony about him. And the charge that the hydrogen bomb plants and the atomic bomb plants are full of communists.
Just a couple of years before, some professors had been fired for left-wing, I won't say activities so much as beliefs. And that tension that I felt in 1954 led me in later years, when I came back as a professor to this university, to find the background to all of this. And once I did, that is, understood how the story unfolded, I decided to put some focus and concentration on a document that was said to justify the firing of the professors. The document was called The Secret Report. Robert Stearns was the president of the university. He was the one who had asked for this report. He hired 2 FBI agents who were also lawyers to come to the university and to investigate the faculty and staff. Now, why did he do that? He claimed he was protecting the faculty and staff because the governor of Colorado and his attorney general were threatening to conduct their own investigation of the campus. And he said, better we do it internally than have it come from the state. That investigation by those 2 FBI/lawyers led to a report which was never released to the public and was called The Secret Report. And in light of that report, a number of staff members left voluntarily. Some faculty voluntarily left, and 2 faculty members in particular were fired. Irving Goodman, a chemist, and Morris Judd in philosophy. Now let's jump several years to I'm a member of the faculty. I want to read The Secret Report. I had become a friend of Morris Judd. Morris said he had never seen the report himself. So I went to the Board of Regents, to the chair of the Board of Regents. I took him to dinner at the Chez Chui, and I said, would you please release the report? He said, oh no. I said, well, why not? He said, don't you know what you're dealing with here? Robert Stearns. He said, the Stearns family is really the first family of Colorado. They are eminent, they are distinguished, they are famous. Do you want to stir that pot? Do you want to invite their wrath? He said, I don't. He said, so I'm not releasing the report. So I went to the Boulder camera, and the camera decided to take the case up. They would sue the university, the camera, for release of the report. They then hired a very gifted lawyer from New York City to come to represent their case. The university's argument was that it was attorney-client privilege. They had a right to keep it secret. The judge was a woman. I don't remember her name, I should. On the second day of the trial, she told the university attorneys to stand up, and she said, you say that this is a secret report, available only to client and lawyer. She said, we know that Robert Stearns read it, we know that Dean Dyed read it, and we know that the regents read it, correct? The lawyers all nod. Yes. She then listed a number of other people she knew who had read the report. And she said, and you're telling me this is client-lawyer privilege when all of these people have read this? I'm finding against you. And by tomorrow morning, I want 50 copies of the secret report at your expense, printed and made available for free to the public. Well, the next day, early in the morning, I was there to grab a copy. I came back and sat in this very chair, and I read the secret report. It was a scandalous report. It was all guilt by association. Very few people, in fact, were named by name, but it was always things like, Mr. X has been known to associate with Marxists. Mr. Y has been known to vote for left-wing parties. Now remember, 1954, and even to this day, it is not a crime to belong to the Communist Party. It may be an unfashionable thing to do, but it's not against the law. Irving Goodman was in Denmark on a Fulbright scholarship. He was a very accomplished scholar, and the chairman of chemistry undoubtedly felt that Goodman eclipsed him in reputation and in accomplishment. So they summoned Goodman to come back from Denmark. They told him he was fired. Goodman didn't object. He just said, okay, and he left. Morris Judd objected. And he said, I want the university faculty to decide my fate. And all the initial committees found in his favor. It finally went to a committee called Privilege and Tenure. And in a very close split vote, it found against Morris. Morris then went to President Stearns and said, I'd like to know what my crime is. Stearns said, Morris, you own that bookstore up on the hill. It's where Fox Theater is now. And many of the shelves are stocked with left-wing literature. Communist Manifesto, Trotsky, etc. And Morris said, there's no law against that. It's a bookstore. I belong to certain groups, organizations. I even share some of their beliefs and sympathies. No law against it. Stearns fired him. Now, what I wanted to figure out was there had to have been something behind all of this. Not just that the state said they were going to investigate the faculty and staff. So I dug into the whole case. I think I know why Stearns did what he did. Stearns wanted to improve the sciences at the university. He also wanted to bring the humanities into closer relationship to the sciences. There should be some comity between them. And he hired the man who had been the historian of the Manhattan Project. And that's where they built the atomic bomb, Los Alamos. And the man who was the historian of the project was David Hawkins, a PhD in philosophy with also degrees in physics and so on. And Stearns had hired Hawkins to come to the university to create this relationship between the science and the humanities. And Hawkins was summoned by the House Un-American Activities Committee in the winter of 1951 to come to Washington to testify about his, David Hawkins' political background. They wanted Hawkins to talk about not only his background, but any of the people whom he had associated with in Berkeley, where he was, and at Los Alamos, who might have had left-wing proclivities. Hawkins never gave them any names and said I dropped out of the Communist. He said I was a member of the Communist Party, but I dropped out of it several years ago. Well, Stearns was desperate to protect David Hawkins. This was the man he had worked so hard to hire. So, to my way of thinking, he needed to have the investigation look elsewhere. He didn't want them investigating David Hawkins. And in fact, Hawkins was immediately cleared by the Privilege and Tenure Committee. And then Stearns said, but there's Goodman and there's Judd. And he shifted the entire focus from Hawkins, who had been in Washington testifying just months before, to these two men. I was shocked by the flimsiness of the secret report. And the Boulder Camera then ran a series of articles exposing the flimsiness of the report, and even discovered that Robert Stearns had been, I guess you might call it, a secret agent for the US Navy. So all of this material was coming out. I wanted to get it into my novel. In my novel, what I need is someone has to get his hands on the secret report. It had been under lock and key at the National State Bank for 50 years. So I decided in my novel to have a theft of the secret report. In 1952, when all of this happened, the administration had offices in Mackey Auditorium. Well, it just so happened that there was a pipe fitter working out here in the hall of this building, and I got to talking to him, telling him about some of my interests. You do know, he said, that there is a tunnel that runs from the front of Old Main to the backstage of Mackey Auditorium. It is a heating tunnel. He said, but during the epidemic, Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, a number of students died and staff, and the ground was so hard they couldn't bury them. So they put the bodies in the heating tunnel. He said when the spring rolled around and they went back into the heating tunnel to remove the bodies, to bury them, he said they were like beef jerky. That was his phrase, beef jerky. So I thought, my narrator can get access to that tunnel, that heating tunnel. When you come down the north steps, steep ones of Old Main, walk about 10 paces to your left, and you're going to see a metal. That's the tunnel. So my person goes through the tunnel and goes up into Mackey Auditorium at night and steals into Dean Dyde's office, finds a copy of the secret report. So I was using the story of the tunnel and the 1918 flu epidemic and the firing of Goodman and Judd, and I managed to put all that together in the novel, A Love Beyond Grievance. Well, you might ask what the title has to do with what I've just told you. Well, the young man who steals the secret report, he does it with the help of a colleague or a friend from the Italian department, a woman. And the two of them are very much in love. They eventually marry, but she prematurely dies. Becky Garland comes back into the story, the one with the child. And for various reasons, after the death of his wife, the narrator takes up with her. And then the novel ends on the ambiguous note, and they lived happily ever after for a little while. A line, by the way, which a young schoolboy told me. I was talking to him. He was only about 8 or 9 years old, and he said, I wrote a story, and he told me the story. And then I ended it, and they lived happily ever after for a little while. I thought, that's a brilliant line. I must remember it. The story begins, if made to tell the truth, we would drown the world in tears. For preservation's sake, we sanctify our falsehoods. But memory, the essence of our lives, refuses stubbornly to abdicate, insisting that at some future time we no longer tell its slant. That time is now.